Episode 15. The news that King Sutasoma had to go back to the Man-Eater spread like wildfire throughout the people. All chaos broke loose. People ran pell-mell in the street to check whether the news was true or not. When they found out the rumors were true, a somber air engulfed the city again. Everyone agreed that the king should not go back again. At the palace, King Sutasoma announced officially that it was his duty to return, one more time saying, "The Man-Eater only released me because I promised I would go back to him. I have no guarantee except my word. I've already considered the consequences of not going back as promised. No one trusts or wants to associate with a king who cannot keep his promises." At night, King Sutasoma stayed at the palace. At dawn, before leaving, he said goodbye to his parents, his queen, his children, and the courtiers. The ministers, courtiers, and the rest of the people could not hold back their tears. They wailed and followed him to the city gates. The crowd kept following him, so Sutasoma warned them against it. He told them to return, but when they refused, he drew a line on the ground and proclaimed, "If anyone still respects me, come no further than this line." The crowd was stopped in its tracks by these words. They stood behind the line, wailing and gazing forlornly at their king until he had disappeared from sight. Having let Sutasoma go, it didn't really matter to the Man-Eater whether the king came back or not. If the king didn't come back, the Man-Eater had already resigned himself to accept any kind of penance the priest rites imposed. In the morning, he made a funeral pyre, bringing the necessary firewood, then set to work sharpening up the rest of the wooden blades while waiting for the wood to turn into charcoal. Shortly afterwards, King Sutasoma arrived on the scene, and the Man-Eater was so happy, he was concerned enough to ask,
"Have you finished the task you set out to do?"
"Yes, I have heard the teaching of Kassapa Buddha from the Brahmin and honored that teaching by offering 4,000 for his services. Having finished all the necessary tasks, I now return to you as promised. You may now do with me as you please." The Man-Eater admired King Sutasoma's courage. He was not afraid in the face of death. The Man-Eater realized that it was meaningless to sacrifice a willing subject, and assumed that King Sutasoma's courage must come from listening to the 100-verse teaching. This made the Man-Eater want to listen to the verses too, so he said to him,
"Sutasoma, I will not forfeit my meal of human flesh, but since the charcoal is not quite ready, while the coals are turning red, how about repeating the 100-verse teaching for me to hear?" It occurred to Sutasoma that the Man-Eater didn't even intend to stop his unwholesomeness, yet he wanted to hear the words of the Dhamma. Sutasoma realized he would have to shame the Man-Eater on account of his inconsistent behavior. Thinking this, he said, "Man-Eater, you are still steeped in unwholesomeness, caring only about your stomach, to the point that you've been banished from your own kingdom. By contrast, the verses I have told you about honor the Dharma. Wholesomeness and unwholesomeness can't be mixed together. A Man-Eater who is unwholesome in behavior like yourself, whose hands are still red with the blood of his victims, is too much of a hypocrite to deserve to hear the Dharma. What is the point of you listening to these verses?" Even though the king's words were directed at the Man-Eater's pride, the Man-Eater kept on listening without any sign of anger or aggression. He found the king's patience with him disarming, and this started to subdue the Man-Eater's pride. The Man-Eater argued, "I'm not the only one in this world who commits aggressive acts. How about the hunter who kills for a living, or the king who slays their enemies on the battlefield? None of them are any better than me. If what you say is true, they must end up in the unfortunate realms too. I don't hear you blaming those other people. Why pick on me for criticism?"
To straighten the wrong views of the Man-Eater, the king taught, "There are 10 kinds of meat a king should never eat. namely the flesh of elephant, horse, snake, dog, lion, bear, tiger, leopard, panther, and human beings. However, you are guilty of eating forbidden meat. You are a king who commits injustice." The king's words touched on a sore spot with the man-eater. He tried to change the subject, saying to Sutasoma,
"You had your chance at freedom. You even returned to your royal palace. Still, you were stupid enough to come back to me, knowing full well it could cost you your life. It seems that you are not as smart as you would make out. If you were as knowledgeable as you pretend to be, you would never have come back a second time."
Seeing that the man-eater had changed the subject when criticized, the king noted that this is the character of a fool who finds fault with everyone in the world except themselves.